everybody, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Lottie and this is my first quarter wrap up. I did not intend to combine my January, February and March wrap ups into one video, but I just didn't get around to editing my January wrap up, and then I didn't have time to film a February one, so I figured I would combine them into one video and just talk you through the books that I read over the last few months. So I did film a January wrap up. I'm not going to refilm and talk about those books again because I can't remember exact things about the books that I read, but I will talk you through the February ones and the March ones as normal. I'm also not going to include my stats in this video. Usually what I like to do is do a few stats for the month and then talk about the books, but because I'm combining 3 months worth of books, I'm just going to talk about the books themselves as a little bit of like a review of what I read over the last few months. So I'm going to insert the January clip of me talking through the books that I read, what I thought of them, and then we'll come back to me in the present day and I'll talk you through my February and March. So the first book I read in the month was Game Over Girl by Naomi Gibson, and this is a young adult sci-fi thriller. So this was actually kind of a completely random and surprising read for me. I saw this on Twitter the day it was released and I was really interested in the premise, so I literally ordered it on Amazon that day. It came the next day and I picked it up immediately. Yeah, this is a young adult mystery thriller with a sci-fi setting, so I will read the blurb to you because this is what initially intrigued me. Lola's been selected to play a new virtual reality game, Better Than Life. In her game, she's loved, is beautiful, can do whatever she wants, but she quickly breaks the one rule, not to recreate people or places from real life. She recreates her house and a boy she fancies. Soon she's skipping school to play. But Lola has secrets, dark ones that begin to surface inside her game. And the more she tries to fix her problems, the more she overlooks a much bigger threat. So I was very, very intrigued by this fictional video game in the book, which is what made me want to pick it up. And sadly, the game was not as much of a player into the story as I thought it was going to be. I, for some reason, love like video games in books. I love Ready Player One, for example. So I was really intrigued by that, especially because I play a lot of like life sims. But I was very impressed with the thriller aspect, especially because it's YA and I don't read thrillers very often, but it's definitely made me want to pick up more books that are similar to this. It was very psychological and that's the sort of thriller that I'm intrigued by. Like this, I think it was marketed as similar to a Black Mirror episode, and I love Black Mirror, so it definitely had those vibes. I think I rated it 4 stars in the end. Looking back, it was probably closer to a 3.5 maybe. I feel like towards the end it just got a little bit messy, but I appreciate what the author was trying to do, and I'm interested to read more from Naomi Gibson and just read more books that are sort of this tone in the future. It was such a nice surprising thing for me to start off the year with, you know, considering I literally just saw it on Twitter and bought it and read it as soon as it arrived because I was just so intrigued to know what was going to happen in it. And I wasn't like gripped by the story by any stretch of the imagination, but I just kept reading because I wanted to know what was going on and I wanted to know like how it was going to end and what this mystery actually was. But the actual what was happening was not that interesting to me, if that makes sense. Like, if it was a film, it'd be the sort of film that I end up looking at the Wikipedia page for while I'm watching it, just so I can know what's going to happen before it actually happens. I'm that sort of person. But I was very intrigued by this. I think it would be great for a young adult audience, but because obviously it's YA, I feel like the most shocking things weren't that shocking to me, unfortunately. But if there's any sort of adult thrillers that have like this sci-fi element, I would be very interested in any recommendations from you guys. It's the sci-fi element of this that I think really gripped me, but the mystery and everything was just not quite what I expected. So then I read Legends and Lattes by Baldree and I rated this 5 stars. I read this over the weekend that I went to Edinburgh for Ro's Patreon meetup, and I loved it. So I read most of it while I was on the train to Edinburgh and then home from Edinburgh. This is a adult low stakes fantasy. It is a cozy fantasy about an orc who sets up a coffee shop in a town where they've never heard of coffee, and I thought I was going to love this, and I did. It was just the mundaneness of everything that was happening. Like, I was just so invested in it, and it's literally just like the main character Viv going and finding somewhere to set up her coffee shop, doing the renovations on the building, adding stuff to the menu, hiring staff, and then something does go wrong. There is a little bit of a conflict in here, but it's like a very contemporary story with this fantasy setting, and it's just something that I was just so in love with, and I really loved the characters as well. I would absolutely die for Thimble. He is so cute, and yeah, I just had a smile on my face the entire time I was reading it because it was so cute. So this is something that I had wanted to read when I first heard about it, when it was still indie published, and I think really what made me really excited to pick it up is Lisa from Lisa Does Life, who absolutely adores this book, and I also have Shell to thank for gifting this to me, because I was just so excited about this book. It was so lovely, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else Travis Baldree has to write. I think he's doing a prequel for Legends and Lattes, which I can't remember what it's called. It's got a similar title. I think it's about a bookshop instead. So I'm very intrigued for that when it is eventually released. I then finished Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare as a part of By the Angel Along. So this is the first book in the Dark Artifices series, and it is a young adult fantasy. So this was actually the first book I started in the month, but it's the third one I finished because it is so long. It's nearly 700 pages, and this was the one that I read through mixed media, so I did listen to most of it through audiobook, which I borrowed from the library, and then I did sort of read this lovely anniversary edition I have here, but most of it was just audio. I think I rated this 4.5 stars. I did really enjoy it, and I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with the rest of the story. I do feel like it was a little bit too long, unfortunately. It's just like a lot happens in it, but also at the same time there were really slow moments that I just wasn't as invested in. I feel like as well I'm not as connected to the characters in this series just yet as much as I was with the Infernal Devices series and also the Mortal Instruments, but I like the little nods to characters we already know and love, like Clary and Jace pop up in here, Magnus pops up as well, but it's still very much its own series and its own story. But much like other longer series such as the Realm of the Elderlings, for example, I wouldn't recommend picking this book up and this series up if you haven't already read the Mortal Instruments and the Infernal Devices, or the two short story collections as well that we've read for By the Angel Along previously. So that's the Magnus Bane one and the Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, because there are things that, like, there is a chronological order to all these books, so I would definitely say to read those series first. I know it's quite a lot to get through, but if you're intrigued by the premise of the Dark Artifices series, I feel like you need that background knowledge first. So without spoiling too much of those series that come previously to this is following Emma and Julian, who are parabatai, and there is a bit of a forbidden romance thing going on there, and they're also dealing with the aftermath of something that happens in the Mortal Instruments series, which leads to a lot of animosity towards Fae in the Shadowhunters world. So I really love the kind of forbidden romance thing. At the heart of as much as a fantasy reader I am very much like a romance fantasy reader, you know. I love a romance in a fantasy book, and I really love the whole forbidden romance thing as well. But we're sort of getting a little bit of a love triangle coming in here, I think. So I'm really intrigued to see what's going to happen in Lord of Shadows and where the story is going to go. There is a lot of characters in this, and I feel like because there is so many people and there's not much introduction to them, you kind of expected to already know who they are because they do pop up at the end of the Mortal Instruments series. I feel like I don't know them very well yet, so maybe that's why I'm kind of not quite loving it yet, but I enjoyed the story quite a lot. Yeah, and as I've said, I'm really intrigued to see what's going to happen with the next book. I then read Double Cross by Malorie Blackman, and this is the fourth book in the Noughts and Crosses series. So I was kind of apprehensive to pick up, and now I think it's because the first three books of the Noughts and Crosses series are kind of their own thing, and then the author felt like she had more of the story to tell, so that's what this is. This is a continuation of a series that had kind of already concluded, and it does feel that way. Like, it does feel like it's something you don't have to read to get more from the characters and the world, but also I enjoyed what this story was. So in the world of Noughts and Crosses, it's a little bit of a reverse history where crosses, who are black people, have the power and privilege in society, and noughts, who are white people, don't. And so in the first 3 books, we're kind of following a storyline of freedom fighters and terrorists as well, where the noughts have this group called the Liberation Militia who are fighting for the rights of noughts, but they're doing it in a very roundabout way that just creates more problems than it solves. And so we're mainly following in the first book Callum and Sephi, who Sephi is a cross, Callum is a nought, and they have a little bit of a forbidden romance there. The whole series is kind of spanning generations of this family, well, Callum and Sephi's families, and so by this point we are following Sephi's child, and mainly her friend Toby. Toby is very much the main character of this, and there is a note from the author at the start of the book that says this is kind of a reflection of Callum and Sephi's love story, except with Toby and Callie Rose. Mainly we are following Toby in this, and what Toby is doing is trying to get revenge by entering gang culture. So he gets wrapped up in these gangs that are very present in his community, and he's doing that because he wants to get revenge for something that happens in the book. And I thought it was a really interesting commentary on gang culture in the UK especially. It definitely reflects like our own society. Like, this is a dystopian, but for me it just feels like a different way to tell a story of something that happens like in a contemporary setting. So I really enjoyed following Toby. I thought he was a really interesting character. He comes from a very underprivileged background, but he has high aspirations. He really wants to go to university and make a name for himself, and it deals a lot with this gang culture. It deals a lot with drugs as well, and it was just really interesting. It was a bit of a thriller as well, I think, in there, like a crime, a thriller, a dystopian. So there was all these elements that I've in books that I don't tend to normally read, but I found it really interesting. I am intrigued to carry on with the series and read book 5, but I know book 5 takes place several years after this one. So again, I don't feel that compulsion to pick it up, because I feel like at this point in the series we're kind of seeing snapshots of these people's lives as they get older, and I like seeing characters we've known since before they were born, really, as they grow up. But the plot of the 5th one I think is really different to this, and the plot of this is really different to books 1, 2 and 3. So they're kind of becoming more companions, I feel, in a longer series. So I don't know how soon it's going to be before I pick up book 5, but it's definitely a series I want to finish in 2023. I'm just, yeah, I did really enjoy this. I think I said, I don't know if I said, but I rated it 4 stars. It's the writing style that I really don't get on well with. Like, Malorie Blackman has this really distinctive writing style that takes a while for me to get into, but I enjoyed seeing Toby's character and kind of what was going on in his life. And the final book I read in January was Saga Volume 3 by Brian K. Vaughn and Fiona Staples. Of course I rated this 5 stars, so I love Saga so much. I know I'm only on volume 3, but it was like a favourite basically after volume 1, but I feel like now I'm at this point in the series, it's really solidified it as something that I'm like gonna absolutely love, and I'm really excited to read volume 4. I want to pick it up as soon as possible. I did leave the gap between 2 and 3 a little bit too long because I couldn't quite remember what happened at the end of volume 2, so I did have to go back and just flick through just to remind myself what happened. So this is kind of taking place a week before the final events of volume 2, and we're seeing what happened in that week leading up to what happens at the end of volume 2, and then a little bit further on from that. I just really love the characters in this and getting to see these different perspectives. So in the first volume of Saga, we're following 2 characters who are from warring planets, and they end up falling in love and having a baby together, and it's completely forbidden. So they're on the run, and so we're following them and their child while they're on the run, and we also follow the different groups of people who are pursuing them to capture them and I guess imprison them, sentence them to death, I don't know. Again, it's another forbidden romance thing. I just clearly have a thing for forbidden romances, but I love the epic sci-fi setting. The artwork in this is fantastic as well. Like, I feel like it suits the tone of the story so well, and yeah, I just really love it. Like, it is probably, I think it's like considered the best comic series at the moment, and I definitely feel like it deserves that reputation. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to be getting to volume 4 at some point, and hopefully it'll be relatively soon. I'm kind of a mindset where I don't want to read them too quickly, because I know that there's only 10 volumes, and if I read them too fast, then like that's it, it's over, and I have to wait for volume 11 to come out. But also I want to keep reading them because I'm really invested in the story. Especially, I think there's going to be a little bit of a time jump between this one and the next one, because the baby is a little bit older at the very end of this one. So I'm like, oh, I don't know, like what's going to happen next? I'm just really intrigued. So yeah, Saga, 5 stars, like can't recommend it enough. So these are the 5 books that I read in January. I feel like my favourite was probably Saga of the month, but I feel like I don't really have a most disappointing because I rated them all quite highly. Like, I feel like Game Over Girl wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't disappointing by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I feel like it was a pretty good start to the year. I didn't read as much as I wanted to, but Lady Midnight did take me quite a while to get through because it is just so long. January was a pretty good reading month. I think it was a good start to the year, good way to kind of set the tone for how I'm reading in 2023, because I had a lot of good books that I read, and a couple of 5 stars in there as well. So at the time of filming this, I don't remember what I said in January, but I hope you enjoyed that little clip. So let's talk about the books that I read in February. So the first book that I read in February was Lost in the Moment and Found by Seanan McGuire, which is the 8th book, I believe, in the Wayward Children series. So this is a series that follows children who are able to go through doors into portal worlds, and this world is like perfect for them. It is the sort of thing that they have been looking for in their lives, and the even numbers of the books in this series, we are following the children in these portal worlds. So in this book we are following Ansi, who discovers a world that is kind of, I think it's called a nexus between other worlds, and Ansi is actually able to go to different worlds through doors in her world that she's in. I thought this was a really, really interesting installment in this series, and I loved following Ansi and finding out about her, and I'm very, very excited to see what's going to happen more with this character as the books go on. It has been a little while since I read this, so the details are a little bit fuzzy now, but I just remember really, really enjoying it. It was very, very emotional. It felt very personal to the author as well. I did read this on audio, so I do really recommend that, and yeah, it was just fantastic. I then read Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas, which is the 6th book chronologically in the Throne of Glass series. I was not a big fan of this installment in the series, unfortunately. I felt like there was too much going on in the book itself. We are following a lot of characters in this book, and they are kind of all over the map. So we felt just a little bit all over the place and difficult to follow, sadly. I was very, very disappointed after Queen of Shadows because I really enjoyed that book, and I was very excited to see what was going to happen next, and I feel like this was just a bit of a letdown. So in the Throne of Glass series, we're following Selena Sardothian in the first book, who is an assassin, and she has been captured and enslaved in these salt mines, and she's told that she will be freed if she competes in a competition to become the king's champion. So she competes in the competition, and while the events of the first book are going on, she uncovers a bit of a secret going on in the world that ultimately leads to the events of this book. So I do kind of like these different characters. I don't know how I feel about them. I don't. I think, yeah, they're all right, and then I think, actually no, when I get to the book itself, I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. And that was really unfortunate about this one. It took me the entire month of February to read because I just could not get myself into it properly. I like the way that the characters are kind of paired up as couples, but sometimes it does feel a little bit forced because there's this many number of characters and it's kind of like they're being slotted together instead of able to shine on their own. But yeah, my main complaint about this book is that it felt like it was just all over the place and there was too many things going on, so it was a little bit disappointing. I then read Shipwrecked by Olivia Dade, which is the final book in the Spoiler Alert series, which is a series of contemporary romance standalones that follow the cast of a TV show that mimics Game of Thrones. So this book actually opens with a sex scene between two characters who just meet each other one day in a sauna. They kind of like each other, so they decide to have a one-night fling, and the next day they both show up to the audition for the show in this series, or to audition for two characters who are going to be love interests. So it is very, very awkward for them. They both end up getting the roles that they auditioned for, and so they have to spend the next 6 years filming on a isolated island away from the other cast, and really have to kind of put up with each other. And as time goes on, they become really good friends throughout their working together on the show, but there is still that burning chemistry from their very first night together. So I actually really enjoyed this book. I think I rated it 5 stars in the end. It was really interesting to see these characters' relationship develop from being friends to lovers. It was lovers to friends to lovers, really. It was a little bit frustrating at first because I felt like it was dragging on a bit, and I was worried in the first sort of 100 pages that we were going to follow these characters over 6 years, but you do see them at the very start of the show when they first get to know each other, and then it kind of time skips forward to when they are filming the finale of the show. We also do have our returning characters from the first 2 books, and it was really interesting to see how their storylines tied back in with what was going on in the characters in this one as well. Yeah, I really loved this one. I can't wait to read more from Olivia Dade. I'm a little bit sad that the series have ended. I loved the snarky commentary about the show that is in this series. It's very obviously meant to mimic Game of Thrones. The 2 showrunners have similar names. The name of the show itself I think is called like Game of the Gods, or Gates of the Gods is what it is. It's a little bit similar, and the way that they talk about the last season is very reminiscent of how the cast of Game of Thrones felt about the final season of Game of Thrones, and just kind of how the show was treated. It's all very funny to me as a fan of Game of Thrones, and I really enjoyed seeing that kind of mimicked in this book series. But this is a series that is also really great for people who like fantasy, who read fan fiction. The first book is actually following 2 characters who write fan fiction, and so it's been really interesting to see all these different characters interact with each other. And also the smut in these books is very good as well. I then read The Book Eaters by Sunyi, which is a standalone fantasy novel with a horror theme, but I was a little bit disappointed by the amount of horror that was actually in this. It wasn't a lot of horror, so if you are not a horror fan you might enjoy this, but I was kind of expecting a little bit more from it. So in this book we're following families of people who eat books, literally eat books to get sustenance, and when they eat these books they absorb what is in the book itself. So little girls are given fairy tales to eat because they believe that little girls are meant to be innocent and they don't want them to be educated on things, and kind of more intellectual books are reserved for the men in the society that we follow. Children are given dictionaries to eat to help them learn words, but I also really liked how the physicality of a book as well affected kind of the taste and the enjoyment that book eaters had when they ate the books. And the character we're following in particular has a son who is actually a mind eater, and mind eaters are kind of mutated book eaters, where instead of having book teeth, I think they were called, they have a proboscis for a tongue, which allows them to go into a human's head and suck out their brains. And when mind eaters consume minds, they start to take on a little bit of the personality of the person who they've consumed. And mind eaters are, they're meant to be controlled with a drug, and the family that developed this drug has gone missing. And so our main character and her son are kind of on the run, trying to stay away from the other book eaters because something has occurred prior to the beginning of this book. So they're on the run because of that, but they're also trying to search for a solution to help her son. So at the very beginning of this book, I was very intrigued about what was going to happen with her son. It gave me zombie, zombie apocalypse type vibes. And I was very intrigued with how, like, book eaters, the biology of them, I suppose. And in the book we're following, each chapter alternates between present day and the past of the main character, so leading up until what has happened present day, to kind of give you that backstory. I did listen to the audio of this while I read it, but I just felt like it could have been so much more, probably because it's so short as well, is where it struggled. But I liked the society, and I would have loved to have seen more of Book Eater society. It's set in the real world, and I feel like a lot of the focus was on the action of the present day, and I just didn't really enjoy that. But I was very, very intrigued with the biology of book eaters and mind eaters, and I would love to have explored that a little bit more. I also thought the fact that the main character's son was a mind eater was going to be a bigger problem than it was. And at the beginning, Devon, I think the main character's called, she's very conflicted because she kind of lures humans in to her home for her son to eat, and if he goes an extended period of time without eating, he will die or go on kind of a rampage. It's very zombie, vampiric, werewolfy, and I really liked that tension of like her son could go crazy any minute and kill thousands of people, but unfortunately there was just never any of that imminent danger after the first initial chapters, and I wish that we kind of kept that throughout, and it would have definitely made it seem a little bit more horror, a little bit more gothic, a little bit scarier. But I appreciated what the author was trying to do with this book. I just feel like they could have done a lot more, and I wish that they'd gone that extra step to really kind of establish this world and the idea of book eaters and mind eaters, and I wish we could have just explored it a little bit more. This book is really short, especially because it's a standalone fantasy. I think it's less than 300 pages, so there was definitely room for more of the book eater, mind eater biology to have been explored. The last book that I read in February was Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare, which is the second book in the Dark Artificer series, and I absolutely loved this. This, I think, was my favourite book of Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunters series so far. It was a very, very interesting addition to the series, and a lot of things happened in it. It's such a long book, but I was just like gripped the entire time. I did listen to the audiobook of this, which is narrated by James Masters, and he's absolutely fantastic. It was just really, really engaging to listen to, and I was very, very excited to see how the series was going to end after the events of this one. It was a little bit slow to start, I think, and I do feel like the books in this series are a lot longer than they kind of need to be because there is so much packed in here. We follow a lot of characters. We follow the Blackthorn family, and there is a lot of them, so we're kind of got different storylines going on with all of these characters. You've got the main plot between Emma and Julian going on. You've got the kind of overarching plot as well with what's happening in terms of the world. It's all very, very interesting. There was a lot of commentary on here that reminded me kind of history in terms of the Nazis, and I appreciated the way Cassandra Clare dealt with it. It was a very, very exciting installment in the series, and it's made me think of the Dark Artificers in a new kind of way, and not just kind of like it was tagged on to the end of the Mortal Instruments. But I really, really enjoyed this book, and I'll talk about Queen of Air and Darkness in a little bit when I talk about my March books. So this is what I read in February. Now let's talk about what I read in March. The first book that I read in March was The Blade Itself by Jo Abercrombie, which is the first book in the First Law series, and of course I'm reading this for First Law along. So I actually really, really enjoyed this. It was a big surprise. I was a little bit skeptical on how I was going to feel about it. It felt like a very, very masculine fantasy book, and it really delightfully surprised me, and it's made me want to explore more fantasies that are out there than my typical kind of romancy YA stuff that I've been gravitating towards. So the actual kind of story that's in this book is difficult to describe because there isn't much of a plot, and I did struggle a little bit with this because it's difficult to follow because there's not a very concrete plot at the moment, but we are following three characters who are Logan, who's a barbarian, Jazal, who is a fencer, and also Glocta, who is an inquisitor for the king. And they're kind of all in different parts of the world. Glocta and Jazal are in the same city, but they run in very different circles, so it feels a little bit like you know, how do these characters connect? And it was interesting to read this and see actually how these characters' stories are intertwined and how they're going to interact with each other in future books. I was very, very intrigued by it, and the hints that we've gotten of what the overarching plot might be, I'm very intrigued by as well. I was also really surprised at how funny I found this book. It's a very dry, sarcastic humour, and I really enjoyed that, and I'm looking forward to reading more of Joe Abercrombie's books as we make our way through the First Law world. Something to note as well is that Inquisitor Glockter is disabled, and I really appreciated the way that his disability was handled in this book. It felt very realistic for the time period, but also for how he has become disabled, because Glockter also used to be this fencing champion. He was in the military, and he's just now basically like a bitter old man. In fact, I don't think he's even actually that old, but he's this kind of this bitter man now because he has this disability, and it's kind of crushed his dreams almost. And when he sees Jezal, he's like, that should have been me. Logan is very different to the other two characters. He is a Northman, he's from a different part of the world, and his story is going to be very interesting to follow, I think, because of how different it feels like it's going to be from Glockter and Jezal. And Jezal himself, I feel like already we're seeing a lot of character development with him. He starts off as a very cocky young man who thinks that the world is at his feet, and already we're starting to see different things with him. But I'm also very interested in the other side characters we have in this book as well, whose perspectives we don't follow, and I'm very excited to carry on with the second book. I then read a few books for a cat books vlog, starting with The Cat Who Caught a Killer by L.T. Shearer. So this is actually a mystery novel, and I don't read mystery books very often, so I was a little bit skeptical in the first place as to whether or not I was going to enjoy it. And I didn't enjoy it, but it's not because it was a mystery, it's because of the author. So there is a lot of commentary in this book from the author regarding politics, regarding COVID, and regarding the police, and I just didn't appreciate the author's take on any of these things. It felt very much like Tory propaganda. It felt like the author is a COVID denier, and some of the commentary by a police officer character I found really uncomfortable. It's like they were trying to say that racism and sexism is okay, which obviously it's not. I liked the idea that the cat in this book can talk. It was never really explained, and I didn't feel like it needed to be. But I liked him as a character. I just thought he was going to be a much bigger part of solving the mystery than he actually was. And there is also a lot of discussion in this book about grief. The main character's mother-in-law has died, and she believes it is foul play, which is what prompts the crime solving in this. And the way the main character kind of discusses her grief in this book I found very interesting, and enjoyed reading that. But for the most part, the mystery in the book just wasn't really there for me. I would have liked there to have been more sleuthing in this book, whereas pretty much the main character phones this police friend she's got, and he finds stuff out for her and then tells her what he's found out, instead of actual sleuthing going on. So it was a little bit disappointing in that aspect, but my main problem with this book was the author's take on things. I then read She and Her Cat by Makoto Shinkai, and I absolutely loved this. This is a translated literary fiction that follows different cats in this neighbourhood in Tokyo, and we are following the perspective of the cats, but we're also following the perspective of their various owners. And I really enjoyed seeing how the cats kind of all interact with each other and know each other in the neighbourhood, and also seeing the stories of the lives of their owners as well. All of them are kind of dealing with something very life-changing, I would say, and it was interesting to see how their cats helped them deal with these different things. This was a little bit emotional. It did make me cry at one point, and it's because one of the cats really reminds me of one of my own cats in terms of her story and what she's been through. And it was just very touching, very sweet slice of life style, and I really loved it. The last book that I read for that vlog was The Dalai Lama's Cat by David Mickey. I wasn't a huge fan of this. I did listen to the audio while I read it, and it was just kind of okay. I think I rated it 3 stars in the end. It was exactly what I was expecting, which was a story about this cat but with a lot of Buddhist teachings in it, and because I'm not a religious person, I just didn't really care about the Buddhist teachings. I can appreciate them for what they are, but at the same time it just felt like pointless to me. I would have just liked to have seen more about the life of this cat living with the Dalai Lama, and instead we kind of got the cat living with the Dalai Lama and then feeling guilty about catching a mouse because that wasn't very Buddhist of her, or constantly grooming herself because vanity isn't very Buddhist of her. And it's like, well, the cat isn't a person, the cat is a cat. And I like it when animals are kind of personified in books and seeing books from their perspective. The entire book is told from the perspective of the cat, and I like seeing that. It's just when the cats become a little bit too human-like in terms of the way this was done, I just felt like it was a little bit unrealistic. And when I look for the kind of books from perspectives, this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking of, not this. So I did like it and appreciate what it was, but it just wasn't really for me. I did find out that there is like a whole series of these books, but I'm probably not going to bother reading them. I feel like they're just going to be more of the same sort of thing, where it's Buddhist teachings but from the perspective of this cat. The audiobook is read by the author, and I was a little bit worried at first because I didn't really like him as a narrator, but I kind of got into it a little bit. But yeah, it just wasn't really the kind of book for me. And then the last book that I finished in March was Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, the final book in the Dark Artifices series. And pretty much everything that I said about Lord of Shadows is exactly how I feel about this book as well. I thought it was a brilliant finale. I was very, very shocked by the last line. I can't wait to see what's going to happen next chronologically in this world. I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think any of the other series we're rooting for By the Angel Along are set after this series. I think they're all kind of pasts. I know obviously The Lost Hours is set in the past, but I believe that The Elder's Curses is set in the past as well. Like, it's set before this series. I'm not 100% sure on that, don't quote me. But I need to know what's going to happen next. I'm in shock. I just love the way that this world has kind of grown with these 3 books. It was just a lot of fun. I really love the characters in this as well. I didn't think I was going to enjoy reading about the Blackthorns quite as much as I did. I absolutely loved seeing them all and their different stories. We kind of have Emma and Julian, and then we have Ty and his sister Livy, and then there's also the younger Blackthorns as well, and they're all kind of doing their own thing. So there's a lot of plot going on. These are really, really long books, and it can feel a little bit difficult to keep up with what exactly is going on, but I think it's done very well, and I feel like if they were any shorter they would be too intense. But I really, really enjoyed this series. I think it is probably my favourite of all of the Cassandra Clare series thus far. I feel that The Last Hours has potential to take the top spot. But yeah, I was just really, really excited to see the world of the Shadowhunters expanded. We explored fairy a lot in this series, and I just really, really enjoyed it. I'm very much looking forward to carrying on with By the Angel Along. Next we are reading the short story collection Ghosts of the Shadow Market, so I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen with that one. So these are the books that I read in March. A little meek stack, but obviously Queen of Air and Darkness, I don't have a physical copy of it at present, took up quite a lot of my time during March. So those were the books that I read over the last 3 months. I tried to keep this short and sweet for you guys because there was obviously quite a lot of books to get through, but from April we should hopefully be resuming normal monthly wrap-ups with a few stats thrown in there as well. Let me know in the comments down below if that's something you are excited to get back to. Please also let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video and what you thought of them. I would love to discuss them with you and see your thoughts. But that is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please do give this video a big thumbs up, and let me know in the comments down below what you read over the last 3 months. If you haven't already and you would like to be, please do consider subscribing. I post a new video every single week. And that's it from me today, guys. Bye!